Welcome to Manhwa Recaps, spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. If you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing. If you don't like subscribing, feel free to leave a comment, or like. Sorry for the interruption. The Manhwa starts with introducing us to a hunter institution named Valhalla. Multiple people try to apply, but the admission rate is 500 to 1, so only 150 people can graduate from the academy. It shows competition, and we see multiple fights happening, each within their designated cubes. We see an instructor named Lee Sankyil overseeing the fights, and a man approaches him saying there are a lot this time around. His name is Yu Min-jun. The instructor asks if the man is here to see his niece, and the man says of course, and that the Yushin family is expecting a lot from Soyeon. We learn that she's a genius born within one of the top 5 great families, and she is able to wield mana much more advanced than her age should allow, even imbuing her sword with it. And at the age of 16, she competed against the Yushin family, and came out on top. Sankyil asks if that's all, or if there's anything else he doesn't know, and Min-kun tells him she is apparently able to communicate with their family's guardian constellation. And we learn that the reason the 5 families exist is because each one has a guardian constellation associated with them. Normally a hunter receives blessings or has a contract with a constellation, however, the 5 families are different. Each family has their own respective constellation, each with its own specialty, and their blessings are much greater than normal constellations. Sankyil recognizes if she can really communicate with it, then she's definitely a genius. Min-jun asks how she's doing, and Sankyil says, she'll start in 30 seconds. And Min-jun asks if he can watch. Sankyil pulls up a window, and we see Soyeon standing in front of a man, Kim Ju-hyuk. Sankyil comments that they are both quite calm, and Min-jun says the opponent knows it's Soyeon, so he's probably just given up, and they comment that Ju-hyuk has no fighting spirit, and they think it'll end quickly. The countdown begins, and we see the fight start. Soyeon rushes in and swipes at Ju-hyuk, creating a wave of mana to be launched at him. As it goes to hit him, we see everyone making a surprised faces, and it shows her passed out on the floor. Equal rights, equal lefts. He's declared the victor, and he wonders why everyone is so weak, and asks if this is really 300 years in the future. It cuts to a flashback of 300 years ago, inside the Tower of Destruction. We see a man named Barky, the god of destruction, commending the martial god Kim Yun-oh, and Yun-oh kicks Barky's head off, and begins to laugh. A pop-up appears saying he's defeated the boss of the tower, and the tower begins to shake. He realizes the tower is being destroyed due to Barky being dead. He explains he's been busy since he was a kid as a hunter, and just when he finally gained recognition, this happens to him, and he wonders if he should have brought his disciples, but realizes it would have been bad because Barky was too strong for them. And he is crushed by a piece of debris. But he opens his eyes and learns he reincarnated 300 years into the future, and while his body is weak, he just needs to adjust, and live peacefully. But a window appeared commenting that the tower will return in 5 years, and he resolves himself to destroy the tower once and for all this time, and then live his life of luxury after. Another pop-up appears, telling him to regain his memories and weapons inside of Valhalla, and then it cuts to the top 10 of the competition. We learn his opponent is part of the Osun family, and his name is Seuk. He comments, thinking that Ju-hyuk is weak looking, and tells him he will QD him quickly, and when asked what QD means, he says it means quickly destroy. Ju-hyuk tells him to FO then, and curses at the man, and the match starts. We learn that Seuk's physique is his main talent, and that he's exceptionally strong, and thus called a genius for being born with such a strong constitution. Angered by Ju-hyuk, he rushes in and begins to throw a punch, but it is dodged, and Ju-hyuk kicks his leg out from under him, causing him to lose his balance, and hits him with a palm strike to the chest, knocking him unconscious. And he is declared the victor, and he walks away. The observers are surprised, and comment they didn't expect Seuk to lose that quickly to a simple attack. The head of the Osun family says it wasn't a simple attack, and even if his son never cared to learn martial arts, he still dodged any attack from his peers, but it was something he couldn't dodge. And that his son even used magic but was easily avoided, and he realizes from the second that his son charged in, Ju-hyuk already had a plan, and calls his talent monstrous, and that the others are just ignorant of his talent, and he'll bring him into his family. It goes to the next fight, and we see the crowd going wild over the girl he's fighting, and he wonders why adults are acting like this. She is introduced as Choi Arin, and the match starts. She postures herself, and holds her katana, and they just awkwardly stare at each other, and he wonders if she is waiting for him to attack, and he compliments her on trying to read the situation. And he decides to see how she reacts with him approaching her. She begins to put lightning on her sword, and everyone is surprised. She begins to draw her sword, as he continues to walk at her. She thinks it's her chance and swipes at him. She is surprised he's vanished, and he calls out to her, and tells her if she shows him where she's going to attack with her eyes, it makes dodging too easy. She is surprised he's beside her, and he punches at her, but she blocks it with her blade, and it pushes her back. He comments on her blocking it, and she is shaken by how powerful the attack was. He puts his fist on the blade, and tells her to try dodging this, and Bruce leaves her, knocking her unconscious. He comments that his attack felt off, but that it doesn't matter, and he's declared the victor. We see him walking away from the school, and he is swarmed by interviewers, and he yells for them all to shut up. It shows some articles about Ju-hyuk cursing at reporters, and some comments about him, and then it cuts back to Valhalla. They are having a student orientation, and Ju-hyuk is bored, but notices everyone is afraid of him, and he wonders if he showed off too much, and remembers the window about finding his memories. The entrance ceremony ends, he heads to the virtual combat simulation room, and the instructor is confused why he has all of the top students, even though it was meant to be random assignments. And he sees Ja-euk and thinks he's doomed. He introduces himself to the class, and we see him start the simulation. The students freak out because the terrain changed, and the instructor shows bloodlust, which makes some monsters appear. Seuk gets attacked, but a barrier blocks the attack, and we see it holding off the monsters, and the instructor calls for Ja-euk, and he asks if he can take care of the monsters alone, and the instructor thinks that he's scared and he'll say no, but Ja-euk begins to laugh. The instructor asks if he really thinks he can beat them by himself. Ja-euk says yes, and the instructor tells him to do it then, and Ja-euk asks if he does it, he'll have a prize, and under the condition he beats all the monsters he asks what the instructor will bet. And the instructor says he'll do whatever he can under his power for him. The instructor tries to explain, but Ja-euk just tells him to hand the sword over, and asks how he's expected to fight without a weapon. The instructor pulls out a sword, and hands it to Ja-euk, and we see the barrier open and everyone stares as Ja-euk begins to slaughter the mobs. It shows him continuing to kill the monsters with ease, killing 4 with one slice, and easily defending himself too. Ja-euk is happy that it's been 300 years since he's held a knife, and that it's not bad, and how in the past, they'd use any weapon available. While he's thinking, a large monster appears to swing a club at him, but it is easily dodged and he stabs it in the face. He comments that it's a well-made copy, and the instructor is surprised because he just let him use a generic sword that doesn't have any magic power, but it's slicing the mobs like butter. Almost as if it is sucking in the monsters. The other students watch in shock, besides Aaron, who is in awe. We see Ja-euk sheath his sword over the monsters' corpses, and he asks if the instructor will keep his promise. It cuts to later in the day, and the instructor ends the class, and we see that Ja-euk is exhausted, because he's never been to school before. He's interested in the constellations, and mentions how it's used to refer to those who are gods, and they have a connection to hunters, and he thinks the rest of the school will be useless. And he decides it's time to start seriously training, because he's weak. We see Aaron approach Ja-euk, and it cuts to Sankyil and the combat instructor talking about how Ja-euk killed all of the mobs, and they are surprised that he has no background, and that he's an orphan from a dangerous area. We learn that Ja-euk asked to get into the constellation room here, and Sankyil says he'll talk to the headmaster about it. The instructor thanks him, and then tells him he's worried about what's going to happen in the next year. Because his class isn't easy to control due to having the top 5 families, and Ja-euk. Sankyil tells him he isn't trying to console him, but there's an exchange student from the Ventric family in another class. His name is Rockdil Ventric, and how he was kicked out of another academy for causing trouble, and now he realizes his class is better. It cuts back to Ja-euk and Aaron, and he asks her what she wants, and she asks him to teach her swordsmanship. She specifies for him to teach her the swordsmanship he showed back at the simulation, and he tells her no. She asks why, and he says he just doesn't want to, and if she doesn't have anything else to say, then he's leaving. She asks again, and he repeats his answer. He asks if there's something wrong with her ears, and tells her to stop clinging onto him, and he has no intention of teaching her, so piss off, and he walks away from her. It cuts to the next day in class, and Ju-hyuk comments that his body is better than he thought, and that, at this moment, he can't do anything because he doesn't have magic power, and it's hard to control mana. But if he finds an item, he can fix the issue. We see Rockdil calling out to him, and Ju-hyuk asks who he is, and Rockdil introduces himself, and asks him if he wants to be strong. We learn that the Ventric family uses Beak Mask, which is their guardian, who will sign contracts with anyone in the Ventric family, even if they aren't of Main descent, and this allows them to quickly gain a large sum of power in Europe. And this has caused Rockdil to become arrogant, and this is why he was kicked out of his other academy. Rockdil thinks to himself he always gets what he wants while looking at his soulless attendant Yuria, and that he'll get Ju-hyuk, who is the center of attention right now, and begins to explain to him what he means, but Ju-hyuk asks if he's an idiot. This angers Rockdil, and he asks what he said, and Ju-hyuk explains he understands what Rockdil is trying to do, and that he's indeed an idiot, and asks if he's wrong. Sankil tells Rockdil to get back to his seat, and when Rockdil yells, asking who called his name, he sees Sankil, and walks off angrily, and tells Ju-hyuk to meet him later. It cuts to Ju-hyuk walking out of school, and we see Arn approach him again, repeating her question, which confuses him. We then see Rockdil smashing a lamp out of anger, mad that an orphan humiliated him. He calls out to Yuri, and she doesn't answer, so he grabs her by the hair, and tells her to answer him, and asks if she really thinks she's the eldest of the palace family, and asks if he should throw her out, and she says no. He throws her to the floor, and tells her to contract someone named Dizra, because there's someone he needs to eliminate, and that there's someone in the Rise family he wants to see. She says understood. It goes back to Ju-hyun in his dorm, training his mana, on his bed. He breathes out and says that his body is seriously garbage, and that he can't draw out any magic, and he begins to recall Arn following him, and he asks her why she's following him. And she just repeats what she said previously, and he asks if she's a parrot. He thinks she's annoying, and says he should get her to leave, and tells her 10 million per lesson. She looks down, and he tells her that he's going to leave because she can't afford it, and she asks for his phone. He hands it to her, and she tells him she's putting in her number. That way, it's easier for her to send him money. Ju-hyuk asks what, and realizes she sent him 100 million won, and she asks if he can teach her now. And he says he won't, and he turns down her money. It goes back to him at his dorm, and he says he was surprised about earlier, and how she could have that much money. But he's tempted by the money, but says it's just money, so it doesn't matter, and we see him preparing for something and says it's time to find the secret vault. We see him walking in the woods, and he mentions how he checked out the school in advance, and that most of his hidden notes were destroyed, and there are at least 4 notes, but he's certain that they are in the mountains of Valhalla. He takes his hood off, and he releases some energy, and looks for marbles that respond to his magic, and that he can sense it even with a little bit of magic. He finds it, and begins to dig it up, and comments how weak he is again, and if he knew he'd struggle this much he'd have buried it shallower. And if it weren't for the Tower of Destruction, there wouldn't be a need for this, and the world was on the verge of destruction, and there wasn't any room for his items, so he made notes for it, and hopes the inside is safe. After a while of digging, he finally found it, and we see a vault. He looks for the keyhole and says a regular key wouldn't fit. So he's going to make a string of magic, and form it into a key, and he opens it, and drops down into it. And we see him atop a pile of treasures. Now that he doesn't need to worry about money, he can go search for something, but doesn't specify which. He notices there are storage stones in the vault. He reaches out and picks up one, then infuses some mana into it, and we see it overflowing with mana. He decides to take the jewelry and leave the gold bars, and we see him back in class having an existential crisis. But he is startled when Arn comes up to his desk, and she asks the same question again, and he wonders why someone from a swordsmanship family keeps asking him for training. He decides to ask her, and she says she's never seen anyone wield a blade better than him, and he asks about her father, but she is interrupted by the simulation instructor telling Ju-hyuk to follow him. We see him walking to the door, and Arn reaches out, but stops, and Ju-hyuk tells her 6 a.m. tomorrow to come to the training grounds, and she is surprised, and he asks if she doesn't want to. She shakes her head, saying she'll be there. We see Ju-hyuk in the teacher's office, and the teacher tells him he's been approved to go into the Constellation room, and he just needs to go to the basement, and that he's now allowed to enter any floor lower than the first one. Ju-hyuk says okay, and asks when he can go, and the instructor says tonight is fine, and he replies that he'll go today. The teacher says they can go now. It cuts to them outside of the Constellation room. Ju-hyuk comments that security is so tight, and not just the security, but even the walls are covered in magic, and it's surrounded except for the entrance. Ju-hyuk asks the teacher how someone would go about getting to the second floor, and if you'd need to do something criminal, and the teacher says no, but you would be expelled, and that you'd lose your mind before you lose the skill, and he explains that the Constellations magic runs rampant down there, and if you touch it your mind will break. Ju-hyuk says he understands, and the teacher is confused why he's asking all of this, and if he really wants to go down there, but decides that the first place candidate wouldn't do that, and he knows it's better to stay in the academy. The teacher tells him he has 30 minutes, and then he must come out. Ju-hyuk tells him he'll be back soon while waving. We see the status window again about reclaiming his memories, and Ju-hyuk says he doesn't care if he gets expelled, and that he only came here because of this. As he walks down the stairs, he wonders why there are so many of them, and he comes to a weird prison-like floor, and he wonders if this is really the first floor, but says it isn't important, and that he should go deeper. A window appears, saying he's met the requirements, and that he's being moved to the room, and we see him teleport, and he hears a voice saying it's been a while Muno, and we see Barky, and he says it's been 300 years, but before he can finish his sentence gets punched, and Ju-hyuk looks angry, saying he's happy to see him. Barky tells him to wait, but gets hit again, and tells him to calm down, but is hit again, and again, and again. Ju-hyuk stands over Barky, and tells him he isn't the type to start violence, but it's different because he destroyed his future, while stomping him. Barky tells him to wait, and asks if he isn't curious about this place, and Ju-hyuk says he is, because it's an empty room. Barky tells him it's an imaginary room, and to be specific, it's an artifact, and that the version he sees currently is just an imaginary version, because his real body died 300 years ago. Ju-hyuk asks if he's always been in this artifact, and when Barky says that's right, and he's become a constellation while excited. But Ju-hyuk isn't having any of it, and punches him again. It cuts to the teacher outside of the constellation room, and he sees Ju-hyuk coming out of the door, and makes sure he didn't do anything weird down there, and Ju-hyuk says of course, he just looked around, and he couldn't have gone further because he would have lost his mind. The teacher says okay, and to go home, and Ju-hyuk begins to walk away, and he recalls the rest of his conversation with Barky, and asks if he's the one who is controlling the window he keeps seeing. And Barky says he doesn't know what it is, and Ju-hyuk gets angry, and Barky tells him it's the truth. After he died, he's been stuck inside of this room for the last 300 years with no power. Ju-hyuk asks who sent the message then, and Barky says he received it too, and to contact Ju-hyuk to receive his memories back. But because of this, a weird person emerged, and he wonders if it is the same person who made him the owner of the Tower of Destruction. Ju-hyuk asks who the man is, and Barky says he doesn't know, because his memories of that part are all gone, and he doesn't think they'll come back. And he asks what Ju-hyuk's notification says, and Ju-hyuk tells him what it says, but he doesn't remember losing any memories, and he remembered the tower. Barky says maybe the memories haven't come to his mind yet, and that he's already found the weapon, so the memories will naturally return. Barky explains that this space is the inner world of sacred artifacts, and that he became a constellation because of this artifact. Ju-hyuk gets angry and yells at him. It cuts back to him walking, and we learn the sword was his, and that he wanted to destroy and leave it behind, but the sword won't leave Barky unattended, and that he received a new quest from the sword. Someone calls out to him, and we see a bunch of goons saying they are his seniors, and asks him to introduce himself. Ju-hyuk is surprised a bully has juniors, and the lead, Goober Ririk, says it's not enough to just introduce himself, and one of them walks up, saying he'll beat him first, and begins to say some random stuff, and gets instantly taken out, and Ju-hyuk tells him to stop talking, and fight instead. He continues to combo the piss out of the guy, and then sends him flying over the rest of his group, and hits the wall, rendering him unconscious. When the group turns back around, they see Ju-hyuk has a sword, and are surprised because he didn't have one a second ago. Ju-hyuk tells them to quickly come at him already, and then it cuts to 3 hours earlier. We see Rockdil telling Ririk that he needs someone taken care of, and that he'll reward him. He tells him Ju-hyuk's name, and it doesn't matter how they do it, but to take care of him, and asks if he'll accept. Ririk accepts, and we see him thinking that it doesn't matter if Ju-hyuk is first place. He's still just a freshman, so he won't stand a chance, and that the second graders have contracts with Constellations, and that is how a student becomes a second grader, is because of contracts. And Ju-hyuk, who isn't in a special family, should be easily beaten up, is what Ririk thought, but we see Ju-hyuk taking out his men in rapid succession. He easily claps 2 of them, and then dodges another attack. And hits him in the face, sending him flying. Ririk is stunned by a non-contractor beating up contractors, and wonders what his strange swordsmanship is. It just looks like he's using moderate force, but everyone is getting seriously hit. Ju-hyuk taunts the rest of them, and Ririk yells don't be scared because it's just one first grader, and Ju-hyuk says it seems like the boss has some spirit. Ririk runs at him with his sword, but is hit in the stomach by the sheath, and Ju-hyuk pushes into the hilt, causing a powerful attack on Ririk. And we see him lose consciousness, and Ju-hyuk slaps him telling him to wake up. He asks him why he picked a fight with him, and who they are. Ririk says they are his seniors, and Ju-hyuk asks if it's common for seniors to bully first graders, and Ririk says it's just to put the first place into his place. Ju-hyuk comments on his loyalty, and tells him he'll leave, but to clean the place up. Ririk asks if he thinks he can go to school normally after this, and if people know, then he'll be expelled. Ju-hyuk says, whatever. If they try to say that, everyone will just think some second graders came to bully him, but all got cleaned up, and then he'd be too embarrassed to even show his face. So to think wisely if he wants to go to school, and join a guild, then walks away. It shows Rockdale anticipating a phone call, and it's Ririk. Rockdale answers and asks how it went, and Ririk tells him he's not doing the job anymore. Rockdale asks what he just said, and Ririk tells him he is staying away from Ju-hyuk. Rockdale is confused, because earlier, Ririk was confident about it. Ririk goes to hang up, and Rockdale yells, asking him to wait, and says if he's saying this because he was beaten up, then he should report it to the administration, and if injuries are still visible, then there's evidence, so can't he do that much? Rockdale tells him if he does that, then he'll give him the full amount, and he'll even try to get his family to fund him. Ririk tells him even if his family supports him, they can't reclaim the honor that they lost, and hangs up on him. Rockdale angrily breaks his phone, and asks Yuri if he's contacted Dizra, and she tells him that he's been informed, but he's far away, so it'll take a while to get here. He asks her where he is, and it cuts to Mexico, at an academy named Aripia. We see a group of defeated students, and we are introduced to Dizra Ventric, and he is reading a message from Rockdale asking for him to come meet Ju-hyuk, and the reward is already prepared, and Dizra is excited that he is going to receive money. It cuts to the next day, and it's the Valhalla training room. Ju-hyuk comments that the room is really big, and it puts him in the mood to run. He hears Barky's voice, asking why he's here, and Ju-hyuk asks where he is, and Barky tells him he's in the sword, and asks why he's surprised. Ju-hyuk says he was surprised because he thought he made it out of the sword, and that he'd have to beat him up again. Barky gets shivers, and tells him it's not like that, and Ju-hyuk tells him if that's the case, then everything is okay. And begins to stretch, while asking Barky if he's sure it's okay, and Barky asks if he means his state. Ju-hyuk tells him no, and he's talking about this word and how it's become an artifact, and how they took it out of the room. Barky tells him it's no worries since he replaced it with a replica. Ju-hyuk says that's what he's worried about, and asks how he even made a replica. Barky explains that when he gained consciousness, he lost all of his strength, but he could make replicas from the start, and he doesn't know why he has this ability. Ju-hyuk begins to stretch backward, and he spots Arn just staring at him. He looks a little surprised she showed up. She asks if he's going to teach her now, and he tells her no, that they'll focus on her stamina. She asks why, and he tells her if she doesn't want to do it, she can leave. He gets her to start with stretching, and he explains that if you improve your stamina, the better you can control and absorb mana. And while the current method of training is weird, everyone seems to be investing into their mana before their stamina, even Arn. While she has a lot of mana, her stamina is low. She finishes stretching, and he tells her it's time for real training, and we see them do a series of physical exercises, and afterward, Arn is exhausted, and Ju-hyuk tells her they are just getting started, and to stop lying down and to get up, and that they still have running to do. She looks devastated. It cuts to Ju-hyuk in class saying they trained harder than last time, and she has a physique worth developing. She is shivering from DOMs, and a teacher tells them all they are having a test today. We're introduced to her, and her name is Lilia. She says while she briefly explained on the first day, she's informed them to self-study on dimensional monsters. So today, she'll be testing them and how well they know each monster. It shows everyone taking their test normally, except Arn and Ju-hyuk. And the teacher says time is up, so pass the tests forward, and while the test won't add to your grade, it'll be used to measure your ability in the next class. She tells them the next class will be a combat simulation, and she'll see them later. Barky asks Joo-hyuk if he's sure he can just write his answers like that, and Joo-hyuk wonders if Barky just watching. Barky says he was, and Joo-hyuk asks if he's reading his thoughts, to which Barky says he can only hear the ones that involve himself. Joo-hyuk says he only wrote the answers the way he knew them, and Barky says he understands. It cuts to the teacher's lounge, and she is angry at Joo-hyuk's answers. The regular teacher sees her grading his class's exams, and she says they did well, and the teacher looks a little relieved and says he'll be on his way. Then she says Joo-hyuk's name, and he asks if he didn't put effort in, and she says it's not that, he's just mocking the class, and that it cannot be overlooked, and she'll show him his paper and educate him, because the monsters can't be taken care of that easily. Next week at the combat simulation room, we see the teacher saying most people did well, but calls Joo-hyuk to come forward. He walks up to the podium, and she hands him his paper, and we see he has a 0. She asks if he's sure he took the test properly, and he told her he did. She asks what's the best way to take care of rock goblins, and asks what his answer is, and he reads out, stab it in the stomach. She does the same thing with the second question, and he gives her another straightforward answer, and she says he can't be serious, and tells him that a rock goblin is B+ for defense, so even normal sword aura doesn't damage it, but he's saying a sword would work? He tells her yes, it's all over in one strike, and she gets angry. She says she understands, and if he's that confident, she'll give him an opportunity. We see her transfer the room, and she tells him if he kills the monsters just like he wrote the answers, she'll regrade his points. He says okay, and puts his test down, and grabs a sword. He walks at the monster, and she comments that she's heard of him killing the goblins previously, so she knows he's talented, but a rock goblin cannot be taken care of with any normal sword. The goblin attacks Joo-hyuk, and he rears his sword back, and the teacher is shocked. We see the sword is in the goblin's stomach, and it cracks, then disappears. And he looks at the teacher and says there, just stab him in the stomach. We see the other students are shocked he killed it with a normal sword, and the teacher asks how he did it. He says she saw him do it, just stab it in the stomach? She begins to break down, thinking that only an A-ranked contractor could kill it with a normal sword, but Joo-hyuk took it out with a sword, and he asks if his answer was correct. She tells him that was only one question, and she summons the next monster. She explains that jungle goblins are hard to take care of, because if you don't do it properly, the first goblin will use a howling skill, and other goblins will appear, so normally a magician would be there to kill them all at once, and while he only sees 3 goblins, there are 5 more behind them. And it'll be hard for him to do this with just a sword. We see him rush in, stabbing one in the head, and then another in the head, and before the other can scream, stabs it in the mouth. We see their bodies disappear, and he asks the teacher if the second question was right too. It cuts to Arin and Joo-hyuk running on treadmills, and she is gassed out after their session. He asks if her clan trained her and why she's struggling with just running. She says she doesn't normally push herself like this. He asks how she plans to go up against monsters, if she doesn't train properly. She says she just used magic by borrowing her Constellations' power. And Joo-hyuk confirms his suspicion that they are focusing on magic rather than physical capabilities. However, the risk is big if they keep doing that. He gives some examples of why it is risky, and sometimes how constellations might not even lend power. He asks her if she thinks these exercises are worth it, and she says, of course, and that he'd teach her swordsmanship if she did it. And he says it sounds like she's only doing it because he told her to. Her brain stops working, and he tells her never mind, and they should end it today because they need to go to the academy. He tells her he's going to do another set, and asks if she wants to join, but brain delay kicks back in, so he just tells her to go ahead and go, and she says see you later and leaves. Barky asks if her name is Arin Choi, and Joo-hyuk wonders why he's asking. Barky explains that she kept up with his training without complaining, but asks why he decided to help her. Joo-hyuk says it's because she pestered him so much. Barky asks if he's ever shown her his swordsmanship, and Joo-hyuk says no, but she might have noticed during class. Barky calls her amusing. Joo-hyuk says that's why he found her interesting, so he thought he would teach her a little. Joo-hyuk hears a grunt and looks over to see Seok benching, and they both just stare at each other, awkwardly. Joo-hyuk asks how long he's been there, and Seok says he's been there since the start, and he's always exercised before attending the academy. As he's leaving, Joo-hyuk comments that because of the constitution he was born with, It looks like he's able to train for a long time. Barky asks him why he's interested in Seuk, and Ju-hyuk comments that it's because he's smarter than those who only train magic, and Barky comments maybe. Ju-hyuk asks what the constellations even do, and Barky says he's not sure. Ju-hyuk asks if that's all he can say. Barky says while he is a constellation, he's done nothing for the last 300 years, so he doesn't know anything, but that he might be able to learn if he finishes his quests. Ju-hyuk looks at his new quest, and wonders about the Eye of the Great Forest, and mentions how if it weren't for the quest, he was just going to leave after getting his things back, but he has to be stealthy now. Barky comments how he already failed, because he beat up the delinquents. Ju-hyuk says, until he clears the quest, he can't leave anytime soon, and he can learn about his reincarnation. It cuts to the United Kingdom, and we see the Ventric Manor. And we see a woman named Adalia, who is the vice house owner, asking a butler to tell her what happened. He tells her the labyrinth in the outskirts has been taken care of, and that he's thinking of recruiting a few of the men from it. She comments that one of them is strong, and the butler tells her that 2 of them are A rank. She tells him they are at a level deserving of the blessing, and to test out their capabilities and send them to her. He says understood, and she asks if that's all? He tells her he has some information about Rockdale, and he tells her that he called Disra to South Korea, and this angers Adalia. We learn that Disra is his family's problem child, and that he's committed a lot of bad acts using the family name, and at 19 he killed 5 people just because they started an argument with him, and at 20, he was cut off from the family, and he's been hiding for many years. She tells the butler to keep surveillance on him, and inform Rockdale if he's caught doing something weird, he will be exiled from the family. The butler takes his leave, and we see Adalia say that they are all wielding power they didn't earn themselves, and it isn't meant for trash. And in the end, the power is all for her, and she looks at a picture of their guardian constellation. It cuts to a lecture at school as the teacher is explaining things. Ju-hyuk zones out and begins to think about how his body has a talent for using mana. Though it's not on the level of a genius, it's better than his previous body. But it's weird, that no matter how untrained the body was, the condition is terrible. He was barely able to circulate his chi on the first day, and just a little bit of shoveling made him want to pass out. And he wonders if something happened in the past. But realizes there's no point in stressing over it now. He sees Soyeon tapping at his desk, and she hands him a note. He opens it up just to see Hey, and he wonders what she wants. It shows the teacher explaining everyone is allowed to leave school, but to submit an application beforehand, and that's all for class today. We see Ju-hyuk holding an application for leave, and Barky asks if he's planning to go outside. Ju-hyuk says he is, and Barky asks where he's going, and before he can answer, he's interrupted by Soyeon calling out to him. He asks what she wants, and tells her he even replied to the note, but she didn't say anything. He tells her to hurry up because he needs to submit something, and she begins to stutter very badly, saying, so, and I, repeatedly. He tells her to hurry up and say it, and calls her a freak. She gets angry, asking why she's a freak, and he asks her if she's making him angry for fun, or if it's normal, and asks what she wants to say. It cuts back to him killing the rock goblin, and she's confused because it's different than the books, and she just wants to know how he killed the goblin, but her pride hurts too much. As she begins to ask him, Lilia asks him how he killed the rock goblin, and they are both confused. He's confused where she came from, and asks her why she's butting in, and he thought she hated him because he embarrassed her. She says she's not bothered by it, and she believed there was only one way to kill monsters, but he showed her that isn't true, and she asks if he wants to be her assistant. He tells her no, and he's turning in his form to leave. She begins to beg him, and they continue walking away from Soyeon, who is shocked she was left out of the conversation. The next day we see Ju-hyuk at the market. It gives us a flashback of him on his phone, getting information about where he can sell the treasure in the vault, and he finds the market, and from what he's researched, after paying an entrance fee, you can trade anything, but it's seen as a black market that villains use, and the reason the market is even possible is due to a constellation called the Hidden Ruler, and since a constellation created and maintains it, high-ranking people use it openly. Even though it's illegal, the government doesn't crack down on it, and that's the only reason he was able to find it. He sees a post on how to enter it, and what to watch out for, but is interrupted by a text from Arin. She sends a bunch of crying rabbits, and says she doesn't think she can make training tomorrow, since she has to go out. He replies with KK, and she question marks him. He hits her with it back and says he's just telling her to have a nice trip. Then she spams him with nodding rabbit emojis. He goes back to the post, because if you open the link in the comments, you can make a reservation. It then cuts to him back at the market, and he approaches a rundown cafe. He walks in and opens a door to see the market. He wonders why it feels familiar even though it's his first time there, and especially the sky and the moon are similar to 300 years ago. Someone asks him if it's his first time, and he recalls the post mentioning a man wearing a leather suit, and he tells him it is and pulls out some money, and hands it to the man. The man asks if he has any questions, and Ju-hyuk says he needs to sell some jewels, and wonders where to go. The man asks if he wants an auction, and he tells him no, he just wants to sell it quickly. The man tells him to head to the 3rd district, because the merchants there buy anything. Ju-hyuk asks who the most trustworthy merchant is, and he recommends someone named Morris, and points him toward the 3rd district, and gives directions. And hands him a mask, saying he recommends he wears one. Due to the nature of the goods sold here, everyone should wear a mask, and to think of it as a freebie. Ju-hyuk thanks him, and heads to the 3rd district. He finds Morris, and tells him he has goods to sell. Morris says it depends on the item, but he will process them quickly. Ju-hyuk pulls out a bag and drops it onto the table. Morris opens it and begins to inspect the rings, and is shocked to find one of the rings is an artifact from the era of destruction. Morris wonders if the other rings are also artifacts, and he sees they all are. Ju-hyuk calls out to him, asking how much he can offer him, and Morris wonders where did he get this many artifacts, because, based on his voice, he's only in his 20s. He asks him where he got them, and Ju-hyuk says he heard those questions weren't asked here, and wonders if he was mistaken. Morris says he's right, and apologizes. He says he doesn't know how much to offer, because he can't process them as they are from the era of destruction, and he lacks the capital to buy them. Ju-hyuk asks where to get his money's worth then, and Morris points him to the auction hall. Ju-hyuk asks how long it would take to sell, and Morris says 2 to 3 weeks, and it'll be a while before the auction house opens. Ju-hyuk realizes the whole process would be a pain, and asks Morris how much they would go for at an auction. Morris puts it into his phone and shows Ju-hyuk, and he is shocked to see so many zeros, and he asks Morris how much he is missing to buy them. Morris says even if he sold everything he had, he would still only have 3/4 of the worth. Ju-hyuk tells him that is fine, and Morris is shocked. We learn artifacts are worth a lot because of the constellations, and that they react well to artifacts from the era of destruction, and even a normal person could make a contract with an S-ranked constellation because of them. He recalls a contractor called the Alchemist, and confirms again that the artifacts are from that era due to the way mana flows through them. He's surprised he got the artifacts, and says today is his lucky day. We see someone approach his stall, and we see a man wearing a black cat mask. It cuts to Ju-hyuk back at the cafe he came through, and checks his phone, and we see he earned a lot from the transaction, and with this, his money issue is solved, and he even has way more left in the vault, so he shouldn't have any issues in the future. He receives a call from an unknown number, and he answers it to hear Lilia asking him to get food together. He asks how she got his number, and she says it's because she's an instructor, and to come to the front of the fitness room for lunch, and he wonders who ends a call after saying what they need to, and wonders if he should leech free food. It cuts back to the market, and Morris is asking the man why he's here, and the man asks if their relationship is that bad. Morris says even if they see each other a few times, a merchant cannot just talk to the market's owner, and we're introduced to him. He goes by Black Cat. Cat tells him that he likes the way Morris treats him, and Morris asks why he's here. Cat tells him he'd like to look at the items he's listed for auction, and Morris says sure and pulls out the bag of rings. Cat tells him they should go for quite a bit, and Morris is confused about why he's saying that, and we see Cat's constellation really wants the ring. We see Lilia and Ju-hyuk at a table, and she's eating pasta, but notices that he isn't eating and asks him why. He just asks why Valhalla has a place like this, and she tells him that apart from the cafeteria and staff restaurant, they have a normal restaurant too, and is surprised he didn't know. He tells her he just wasn't interested, and asks why she called him here. She asks him again to be her assistant, he quickly says no. She tells him to think about it first, and explains he'd get many benefits. He asks what kind, and she tells him he'll get a scholarship, and many grants, and the chance to write a thesis with her, and if you publish a thesis, and his name will be listed in the Monster Research Association, and he can go out twice a week instead of once a month. He asks if there's anything else. And she tells him he gets to work with her. He says her ego sounds big, and she tells him to just be her assistant. He tells her doesn't want to, He thinks to himself that there's nothing tempting about the offer, and his current objective is getting to the eye of the great forest, and even if she's an instructor, getting there would be hard. He tells her he won't do it again, and she asks if he would like to trade intel, and she offers to give him the information he's curious about, and he'll tell her about monster attacks. He asks what kind of information. She tells him it's about Aaron, and as he goes to tell her he isn't interested, she interrupts him, saying Aaron might be disowned by her family. Joo-hyuk doesn't care and begins to leave, and Lilia asks where he's going, and he tells her the benefits aren't good for him, and he's done eating, so he's leaving. She says he should give her some intel, and he tells her he didn't really care about it. He says there is actually something he's curious about, and asks why she's so childish normally, but harsh while teaching. She says if she joked around while teaching about monsters, it would cause trouble, because monsters can be attributed to students' survival rates, and the students can't even memorize the basics, so she needs to be hard on them. He tells her that's cool, and tells her good luck while leaving. She calls out to him again, and says he should pay for the information before he leaves. He tells her he doesn't want to. It cuts to Shihung, and we're at the Kwijin family's estate. It shows Aaron's father, Jeonseok, and one of her brothers, Jinjin, and he tells them if they pass the test, they can form a contract with their sacred artifact, and it'll be a testament to them being the successor of the family. However, if you fail, you will be disowned by the family. And he asks if they'll choose to do it knowing this, and they both say yes. Their father tells them it will be held 3 weeks from now, and they may leave. We see Aaron and her brother walking, and he asks her if she can take a hint, and she asks, what? And he explains how their father had a strong expression when she said she would participate, and he tells her it seems like she really wants to be the head of the family, even though she is an illegitimate child. She makes a sour face, and he tells her don't delude yourself by thinking she can win. She can't even obtain a blessing, and she won't even be able to touch him. She doesn't say anything, and he tells her, since she's given up, to go leech off the family, and that he'll see her in 3 weeks. We see her standing there, and she recalls someone telling her she must become the head of the family, and if she does, then she can be free. It shows Joo-hyuk in class, and Barky comments that it's midterm season, and Joo-hyuk is surprised he's mentioning it, and Barky tells him if he would be quiet, he could hear what the teacher is saying about the midterms. The teacher says that exams are a huge deal, and the lowest scoring students get kicked out, and he hopes everyone is prepared for their exams. Joo-hyuk isn't worried about the practical exam, but the written one worries him. He tells Barky that since he's been with him the entire time, that he's taken the classes as well, so he can take the test for him instead. Barky says that he would find that unfair, and Joo-hyuk tells him it's not unfair. He's doing the test, Barky is just telling him the answers. Class ends, and we see Aaron approach Joo-hyuk, asking if they are training, and he asks if she doesn't want to do it. She tells him that isn't it, and he asks if she wants to learn swordsmanship, and he figured it was about time to talk about it. He tells her he'll teach her how to wield the blade, and uses this chance to practice with his weapon. He tells her to meet him in the training room, and she says okay. It cuts to them in the training room, and he asks her how long it's been since she's used her sword, and she tells him a day and a half, and she hasn't touched it since she started training with him. He asks if, before that, she would practice daily, and she says yes. He tells her to unsheath her sword, and we see her pull it out. He instructs her how to grip it, and she is shocked by the difference in slightly changing her grip. He tells her to come at him, and we see her sheath her sword again, and lightning begin to surge around her. She notices she's faster than before, but it is blocked. Joo-hyuk comments on it, and tells her not to put more magic into her feet than she needs to. She says okay, and we see her repeat it. He compliments her, but tells her to rotate more when she stops. Then tells her to continue attacking him, and not to rest. She says okay, and they clash swords again. We see Joo-hyuk dodge her blade, and it destroys some of the floor. She's glad to see that she's much stronger than before, and they continue clashing swords. It cuts to later in that day, and we see that Aaron has damaged the training area, and is tired. Joo-hyuk says it's been an hour already, so they should just call it here. She drops to the floor out of breath, and is happy that her skills have improved so much, but she still couldn't even touch Joo-hyuk. She asks when they will spar again, and Joo-hyuk thinks about it, and how it's beneficial to spar with her, and it's fun to teach her since she's talented, and she's familiar with draftsmanship. I have no idea what this is, and thanks to that it can help him find his senses, and if it were 300 years ago she would have been worth making into a disciple, but he doesn't have the freedom right now. She asks again if they'll spar another time, and he decides to joke around with her. And tells her doesn't want to, and she instantly says understood. He's surprised she gave up so fast, and she says it's because he's right, and thinks that if she follows his words, she'll become stronger. He thinks about what she said, and tells her that's all for today, and she tells him she'll see him next time. 2 weeks later, at the stadium, we see Soyeon, Seok, and Arin, and Ju-hyuk wonders why everyone is gathered here, and Barky tells him his teacher already told him 2 weeks ago. Sang-il tells everyone he'll now explain the midterms, and that the evaluation is based on dungeon attack, and the students will team up and enter an artificial dungeon. They are free to make up any team, and the right amount of people is 8, but you can decide what number you want in your party, and you'll only be evaluated based on your contribution to the raid. And that the criteria for failing are not completing the raid in the given time. The dungeon's difficulty is F+, and he yells to start the exam. We see the students panicking and trying to form teams, and the teacher comments on them being flustered, and we see Soyeon saying her damage dealer isn't good enough, and she thinks to herself that she can't pick someone better than her, and 5 hours is plenty of time for the raid, and what's important is a contribution, and a party of 6 looks easy, but it's hard to stand out, and she tells her group it's time to go. Sang-il says, as expected of the 5th generation, she grasped the point behind the exam well, but the rest of the students go in as groups of 20, or 8, and if the team isn't well balanced, there will be fights. Sang-il tells the homeroom teacher that after 30 minutes, they'll begin grading the students, and we see Ju-hyuk watching them scoring the students who went in quickly, and he notices Arin hasn't gone in yet, so he asks her about it, and he asks her what she's going to do, and she says she'll do what Ju-hyuk says. This surprises him, and he wonders why she's been following his words so well since their last session. He tells her he'll be going in alone, so go. And she asks if she should enter alone too, and he tells her whatever. It doesn't look difficult. We see some of the students noticing Arin is alone, and they approach her, and tell her if she's teamless, how about she joins them since they only have 7, she would make their party 8. She apologizes and says she'll go in alone, and they call her crazy, saying she'll be disqualified. And she tells them she can do it, because Ju-hyuk said it wasn't difficult. They try to tell her to wait, but she goes in alone. We see the teachers watching from a monitoring room, we see some students with barely any points, and the homeroom teacher comments on how harsh the exam is, and how quickly they are being graded, and we learn that Sang-il is actually a legendary contractor with a 99% clear rate for dungeons. So he knows exactly what to look out for, and this is why he can give scores so quickly. We hear Sang-il thinking that overall it's a good year, and that the 5th generation children are doing well, but among them, there's a standout student. Soyeon, and we see her giving clear instructions to her team, allowing them to fight as a group. Some archers shoot the monster they are fighting, and after he blocks their arrows, Soyeon leaps at it, killing it instantly. Sang-il is impressed with how well she coordinated the attack with her group, and if she does well here, then it's just a matter of time until she's back at the top. If it wasn't for Ju-hyuk, her record wouldn't have been ruined. He wonders how Ju-hyuk is doing, and we see the machine wasn't able to find him in the dungeon, and he's shocked to see that he's actually already finished, by himself, without a party. Sang-il wonders if the time Ju-hyuk got is possible for a high schooler. He decides to watch the recording, and we see a group of enemies rushing at Ju-hyuk, and he runs straight at them. He quickly kills a pair of goblins with one thrust, and then slices one of the enemies off the ceiling. But is greeted by 2 giant mobs, and they swing their weapons down toward him, destroying the floor. But he dodged it, and we see him in the air beside them, and kills them both with 1 slash. The instructors are shocked by his performance, and we see Ju-hyuk standing in front of an armored golem, and Sang-il comments on how it's a special golem made specifically for the midterm, and was made to fight a group of 8. The golem swings his arms at Ju-hyuk. Ju-hyuk rears his sword back and thrusts it at the golem, knocking its head off. And he realizes first place is going to Ju-hyuk. Subscribe for more videos like this, leave a like or a comment to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.